The Golden Age of Steam. Working steam. Although the advent of the railway steam locomotive caught the imagination of the public, there were other applications as well, using steam as the prime source of power. The steam car appeared, so did traction engines and even lorries of all shapes and sizes. For many years, ships were propelled by steam power. Indeed, some still are. Nuclear submarines are, for instance. The early ships used rotary paddles located either side of the vessel, and although appealing and graceful, they eventually gave way to screw propellers. In the coal mines of Britain, steam was the source of power for operating virtually anything that required mechanical effort. It powered beam engines, necessary for pumping water out of the mine shafts, as well as providing energy for the reciprocating engine which operated the lifts. But its biggest application was in the form of the railway steam locomotive. Here in South Wales, filmed in 1970, is a scene that has been going on for decades. The location is Hafodyrynys Colliery, and the loco is Glendower, one of the versatile J94 or austerity class. Not in the best of condition, with steam leaking from just about every joint, the engine pushes its load of waste, commonly called slag or dross, up an incline to the waste tip. At Blaenavon Colliery near Pontypool, the diminutive Toto 6, built by Barclays of Kilmarnock, is seen having its fire attended to, after which it trundles down the track, apparently losing most of its fire en route. Later on, its work completed, the loco returns to the shed to be bedded down for the night in railway parlance. Next to it is a sister engine, which will be in use the following day. Mountain Ash, a large mining complex, was unique in that it had 7 locomotives built by 7 different companies. It had 2 BR stations. The one shown here had long been obsolete and was demolished soon afterwards. One of the engines working today is Llantarnam Abbey, another Barclay product in commendably clean condition. The interior of the engine shed perhaps suggests that they were not the most pleasant of places to work in. Another engine in steam is number 1, built by Hudswell Clark of Leeds, and the most powerful locomotive at Mountain Ash. That power was required in lifting its heavy train up the incline from the colliery as it heads for the coal preparation plant at Abraman near Aberdare. Further north is Graig Merthyr Colliery near Aberfan, which had unfortunately placed a ban on all photography within the confines of the railway yards. However, we did manage to catch a glimpse of one engine in steam, even if it was only a brief one. Moving further west is Pontadillus Colliery, perched high up the valley in some wild exposed country. At the marshalling yard, situated next to BR's Cardiff line, a J94 carries out some shunting work, preparing its train of empty wagons to be returned to the colliery. At the level crossing on the road, the loco braces itself for the long climb up the hills. En route, it passes a station that was at one time used by miners to be transported to work in converted railway vans. This long shot of the train weaving its way up the gradient reveals the loneliness of the countryside. The result of a runaway train, perhaps? This colliery closed only a year or two after this film was made, as have most of the other collieries shown in this film. A few miles north of Bridgend is Maesteg, which was the hub of a cluster of collieries all linked by a network of railways. In its heyday it was a busy complex and even had its own signalling system to control traffic flow. Maesteg was the centre where trains arrived from the other collieries in order to have their wagon loads weighed and then marshalled. This was an operation that required much hard work from both crew and locomotive. Sadly, these scenes are now but a memory, as all the steam locomotives have gone and only one colliery remains in operation. Radstock in Somerset was situated on the old Somerset and Dorset joint railway, which ran between Bath and Bournemouth West. The railway, often referred to by locals as the swift and delightful or the slow and dreary, depending on one's travelling experience of the line. It was in Radstock that the only coal mine in the West Country was to be found still in operation, but only just. The steam locomotive was a local product built by Peckett at Bristol. The driver told us about the engine and what was going to happen to it.
Just had the 10-year test. The boiler's 11 years old now. The hydraulic test and all that. He's perfect, the boiler. I like it anyhow. But when the Cold War finished with it, I wouldn't mind it. The president of our club, he wanted to keep it in Redstock. Whether the Cold War is sold to someone else, I can't say. But he offered to go as much as 800, and whether they'll let it go for scrap price, I don't know. I expect he'll be working till the pit closed, perhaps another 2 or 3 years. It's pretty shaky at the moment, you see. The scene, whether they have prospects for any more, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with this engine at all.
Its main function was in propelling loaded wagons to the top of a safe-worked incline, the only one of 2 remaining in Britain. The other one was at Hague Colliery, Whitehaven. The principle is quite simple. A loaded wagon going down pulls an empty one coming up, although the wagon's crossing point looks precariously close. At the bottom, a Class 08 locomotive collects the wagons ready for dispatch on the BR line. In the early 1970s, there were 3 coal mines operational in Kent, 2 of which employed steam locomotives. One of the collieries was Snowdown, near the village of Nonnington, and we filmed this location on a rather murky day in 1970, when a railway enthusiasts group were visiting the area. In steam is St Dunstan, a rather chunky 6-coupled locomotive built by Avonside of Bristol. Note the overhead electric conductor, possibly used by a Class 71 locomotive which sometimes utilised this facility. There wasn't much heavy work being done that day, just a few wagons being shunted around the marshalling yard, which was adjacent to the BR London to Dover line. Nearer the coast was Bettshanger Colliery, which employed a J94 as well as an XBR-08 diesel locomotive. The engine steams out of the loco shed and after a switch of points heads up the line. Requests for a cab ride had to be authorised first. The engine is fitted with a two-way radio. It receives instructions to assist a heavily loaded train headed by a diesel up a steep gradient. The J94 waits until the train has passed, moves out and buffers up with the train still in motion. The combined efforts of the two locomotives get the train up the gradient and into the yard. Some industrial complexes, such as paper mills, chemical works and petroleum installations, required the use of a steam locomotive that was fireless in order to avoid the risk of a fire hazard. The Kilmarnock firm of Barclays developed a locomotive that used steam fed under pressure from a stationary boiler, thus enabling the engine to work for about 45 minutes before a refill was needed. This one is at a paper mill in Swanscombe, Kent. Note the unusual position of the cylinders at the back as well as the small chimney at the rear of the cab. The Ford Motor Company at their Dagenham works had at one time a fairly comprehensive railway system, now much depleted. On a previous visit in 1970, we managed to film, albeit briefly, their only working steam locomotive number 8 in action. However, on another visit a few weeks later, number 8 had been taken out of service and now stands rather forlornly in a siding. The engine was in commendably clean condition with its lined-out paintwork and yellow coupling rods. Elsewhere, wagons were being cut up for scrap, whilst others were being retained. At least steam was in evidence in the shape of their steam crane. being lit up early one morning on the Bluebell is a much larger crane. Cranes have always been an essential part of a railway system, and many steam-operated cranes have been built over the years. This one, owned by London Transport and built by Ransom and Rapier, is seen in operation on the Bluebell Railway. Note the single piston, which not only moves the crane jib up and down, but also propels the unit along the track. When the crane is in the correct position and jacked up on side supports, it prepares to help dismantle a bullied Q1 060 goods locomotive completely, so it can have a heavy overhaul. The Central Electricity Generating Board was second only to the National Coal Board in being the largest user of industrial steam locomotives in Britain. At their Cardington, Bedfordshire power station, six-coupled Barclay number ED9 pushes a long rake of loaded wagons into the coal discharge shed. After emptying, the train reverses back down the yard. Note the engine applying its brakes with the wheels locking and being pushed under the momentum of the train. Steam was still in operation in Northern Ireland in 1969 during the building of the Belfast to Larne motorway, in which steam-hauled spoil trains were widely used for bulk movement from site to dumping ground. Irish railways, by the way, use a gauge of 5 feet 3 inches for their track, instead of the more universal track width of 4 feet 8.5 inches. The engines used were the 264W series, designed by Henry Fowler and built at the Midland Railway Works in Derby. They were known locally as Jeeps, and our film shows one of them being watered at the National Counties Committee loco shed at York Road, Belfast. The wagons were purpose-built, and as they carried a high tonnage, the sum total was a heavy train which required an engine at either end. At the quarries further north, special sidings have been put in to enable a quick turnaround and for tipper lorries to drop their load straight into the hopper wagons. The loco men were amused that we would want to film their old worn-out engines.
You think, look at that scrap.
When are they going to do these locos then?
What's that?
They're going to scrap them soon?
Oh, there's scrap, it says.
They're just, they're not maintaining them, they're just running them into the ground.
They're not doing much telling, you know. Just keep them sort of running, you know.
The heavy trains departed for Belfast every hour. Sometimes steam deputised for a failed diesel on passenger trains, otherwise it was back to more mundane work. One of these was saved from scrapping and restored to mainline running order and has since run on several specials. A visit was made to a large industrial concern at Swanscombe in Kent. The product mined here was gypsum, which is widely used in the making of cement. Note the cab sheets put up to afford the crew some protection from the atrocious weather. This railway had quite a mileage connecting with BR and carrying thousands of tons of minerals which were transported all over the country. Six months later, on another visit, a very different sight, as we found number 3 was the only loco in steam. The rest of the fleet were dumped nearby, awaiting their fate. Only one was saved. With a view of the nearby River Thames, we see the only loco left from a once large fleet sadly trundling up and down, its days surely numbered. Harlesden Power Station is situated in North London, adjacent to Willesden Junction and the West Coast Main Line. In February 1969, after much negotiation, we obtained permission from the CEGB to film the last 2 remaining steam locos at that depot. Little Barford was on duty that day, and although perhaps not in the best of condition, it somehow managed to cope with its workload. The wagons are tipped up and their contents of very fine coal, known as slack in the trade, are discharged into a grating under which a conveyor belt transports the coal to the power station. The loco men were very keen and helpful in making our visit an enjoyable one. It was decided to go down to the shed and haul out the spare loco for our cameras. One of these locos has since been preserved. Government depots at one time employed many steam locos at their various locations in Britain. This one was in use at the Royal Air Force establishment at Farnborough. Some industrial concerns used a narrow gauge railway for internal movement of goods, as seen here with a small four-coupled Peckett locomotive in operation. Longmoor Railway Training Centre held an open day for the public in 1968 prior to closing. 2 steam locos in pristine condition were running that day, and both have since been preserved. Many other forms of traction were on show too. Here's a J94, or Austerity, in action. This one, Errol Lonsdale, went to the Kent and East Sussex Railway for a spell, then was used on the Mid-Hants Watercress line afterwards. This little industrial engine is called Baxter. It lives on the Bluebell Railway. Today it's going to prepare to take out its own goods train. But first we get a good look at its unusual wheels. Its bell will warn us when it's en route to Horsted Canes. On the Kent and East Sussex Railway, a military theme day is taking place. Troop trains are running and uniforms of many kinds can be seen. Actor Clive Dunn of television's Dad's Army is looking after things.
That's a very long camera you got there, son.
Moving military freight in wartime was very important too. A steam crane loads up one of the 2 freight trains running that day. The USA tank was hauling a train comprising American road vehicles. On the Swanage Railway, a freight train is being made ready for some runs later on in the railway's gala weekend. This loco, an 8F, had spent most of its life in Turkey. It still sported its Turkish Railways number plate and cow catchers, or should it be goat catchers. The heavy train finally gets underway after a bout of slipping. At the rear, a ginty has been helping to get the train started. At the other end of the Swanage Railway, at Harmon's Cross Station, another freight train is shunted along by an ex-BR diesel, the often seen 08. And finally, on the Severn Valley Railway, an ex-Great Western designed pannier hauls a freight train. So steam is still working, even if it is only on preserved railways like this.